Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to vRealize Operations Webinar Series 2016. As promised, we are coming back with the Feb edition, which is the part 2, where we'll talk about understanding vRealize Operations Manager policies. So basically, the idea is to help you understand the product from a policy perspective and see how policies play an important role in configuring the product or the solution in a way which can help your environment from a performance and a capacity standpoint. My name is Sunny Dua, and I'll be one of your presenters today. And I have Simon along with me. Simon, will you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Yeah. So I'll be hosting today, and Sunny will be doing the presentation. So I'll be taking any questions that you have. So if you could use the Q&A box. If you want to send me a message, or if you've got any issues, just send me a message, and we'll let Sunny present. And if the question's pertinent at a particular point, I'll sort of step in and interrupt Sunny. That's it for me, anyway.
Thanks, Simon. So he has a bigger role to play than this. So he was the one who started the idea of spinning off this series. So thanks, Simon, for that. And as you can see, he works for Extrovert, a great consulting company, and he also works. They actually work with VMware, so that's how we know each other. Blogs on definite.co.uk. So make sure you hit that blog if you need some good information around vROps and other stuff as well. Myself, Sunny, I work for VMware. Been here for around 4.5 years now in my second innings. I blog at vexpress.blogspot.com, and you can reach out to me if you have any questions on the various social media stuff that you see on this screen. All right, a few housekeeping items. I think Simon touched upon a couple of them, but I will just go ahead and run through once again. If you have questions, you can post them on the chat window, and we will take all those questions at the end of the session. However, if we get an opportunity in between the session, we will go ahead and read through those questions, and Simon will help me with those, and I'll be able to answer them for you. If you really want to ask a question over the phone, then you can do that, and you can just *6 to unmute yourself and ask a question. We'll try to answer it to the best of our knowledge. The session is getting recorded. At this point, I should check it. Yeah, it is recording. And basically, we will take these recordings, like the previous session, and post it on our blog post. And you'll be able to basically listen into it if you want to once again, or share it with others. Everybody who's joining in the call, except me and Simon at this moment, are on mute by default. And in case you want to unmute yourself, you can do that, *6, or you can ask questions on the chat window. So,
Hi, sorry to interrupt you. So I'm not able to log into the WebEx session. So that's why I'm unmuted here. Yeah, it's asking username and password for me.
Username and
Did you register for the session?
Yes, I've registered the session, and I got the meeting request as well, invitation as well. So I got the join WebEx session meeting link as well. But when I click on those links, it is asking for username and password for me.
That's interesting. Is anybody else having that issue? Let us know in the chat window. Because you do need to actually register, because the first invite adds the calendar, and then you need to click register, and it sends you a second email. And that in that registration process, it'll ask you to put your username in and your email address. And from there, you should have got the link.
Yep. So I have a response on the chat window. you can close the browser completely and try once again. It should go through. That's a response which I get from a couple of people on the chat window.
Yeah, yeah, I've been doing that from couple of times already. So I'll try to do the same again.
Try again. I'm so sorry. We're just trying to get the training session on this time, but clearly it is not helping. Just try once again. If it doesn't work, then drop your name on or send me an email, or book me on Twitter. I will send you the recording personally.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Ivan says the registration process is confusing. I agree to Ivan on the chat window. Okay, Ivan, I will go back to the housekeeping items. He can be chatty. Okay, so of course you can share your feedback like the gentleman did right now regarding the process. We'll fix that definitely when we come next time. And at the same time, you can leave those comments on the blog posts as well, either on Simon's or mine, and we'll be happy to go ahead and improve the next time. All right, let me move on and get on to the agenda. So we'll talk about policies today and why do you need them. We'll talk about policy inheritance, which basically explains how policies work. And how the inheritance within the policies work from a perspective of how you can create a father policy versus a children policy, etc. And how do they talk to each other, correlate to each other, and how do they impact the various different calculations which happen within the policies. We'll also talk through the policy creation wizard, the first time policy creation wizard vis-a-vis a new policy creation wizard when you want to create one. We'll go through 6.1 policies. So in fact, we'll go to 6.2 because that's what I have in my lab from Ivan, who's a very good friend of mine here in Singapore and a colleague in VMware. He has 6.2, so we'll run through that stuff. And then we'll basically, policies put to practice as a demo session where we try to take some use cases and try to demonstrate them by creating policies and playing around with what all options we have in our lab so that it gives you a good feeler of how to navigate amongst the policy window and how exactly you can go ahead and create them in your specific environments. And of course, we'll have a Q&A in the end of it. All right, so let me just quickly go ahead and get to the first topic, which is understanding policy concepts, right? So to begin with, it's important to understand that we're not having policies in the product because we just want to have them and we want knobs and switches in the system so that you can control it. It has more to it, right? It has more to do with how you want to do various things in your environment through a single solution of vRealize Operations Manager, right? And if you look at this, right, I've probably jotted down a few points over here, but there can be more to this, and people can have specific use cases around policies. But this will probably cover most of it. So they help define monitoring goals, and that's what they do, right? I mean, if you have a goal to monitor your infrastructure in a specific way, even your applications for that matter in a specific way, then you can actually go ahead and define your goal in the system and make sure that you track the system as per your goal and get the results out of it to see whether you're on track or not. So that's something which you do with policies. They also help you customize your monitoring needs as per your different environments, applications, or business needs per se, right? So you might have 3 different type of businesses you're supporting as IT, and they all might have different needs. And if you will create a single policy for all of them, then you might not do justice to the whole process of policy creation and supporting your business. So you can basically go ahead and customize it and create different policies for different needs, different applications, etc. KPI, a pretty primitive term, but it will always be relevant till the time we are running infrastructures and we are running systems which are talking numbers, right? So key performance indicators is something which you can only define once you have a policy in place. So performance is something which can be measured in specific counters, and those counters become your key performance indicators, and it's important that you have a system to define those for your environment, and that's why you require a policy. Capacity is another focus or function of vRealize Operations Manager, and of course policies play a big role into this. So if you don't know that what is your policy around capacity, you might not be able to derive the correct result at the end of the day. So we'll talk about that as well today. Then, of course, efficiency, that's another feature in vRealize Operations Manager, and which allows you to reclaim resources from your infrastructure, something which you're not using, which is wasted, and hence reclaim a bunch of resources, which basically ends up into saving dollars or pounds, depending upon where you are in the world, or other currencies as well, before anybody gets offended. All right, so yeah. All right, so it also helps you reduce noise through symptom-based alerts. So that's pretty exciting, right? That's something which happens with 6.0 and beyond, where you're just not talking about basic threshold-based alerts, but you're talking about introducing symptoms into the alert, something which we saw last time around the session 1 as well. That piece and the last piece, which is around self-healing, right? So of course, we saw in the last session that if you're trying to do self-heal kind of an infrastructure, wherein you get an alert regarding, let's say, CPU needing more CPU, and you basically scripted everything out using the actions option within vRealize Operations or a vCO adapter, and the CPUs are added, etc. But if you don't define your policy in the correct way, you'll not be able to go ahead and self-heal properly. So it's very important that you understand the policy piece, implement it correctly before you could self-heal the infrastructure with capacity, for instance. Okay, so with that, let's just talk about inheritance, and this is basically explaining how the policy window looks like and how exactly the inheritance works. So if you look at the vRealize Operations system, if you go into the Administration tab and go to Policies, you will see these kind of tabs, right? One says active policy, the other says the policy template, right? That's how they look like. Now, if you look at the screen, what policy do you think has the highest priority? So inheritance and the active policy screen along with priority is defining what policy gets or has a stronger relationship to the objects as compared to the others, right? So if you look at this, we have policy, a default policy which is marked as D. So that's important to note that every default policy in your system, which is the first policy which you apply on everything, or we also call it a catch-all policy, the default policy. And then you have two policies here with priority 1 and 2. So this is how the policies are ranked in the system. And as we move forward, we'll understand why these rankings are important. Then if you go to the second tab, which is the policy template tab, you can see that you will have a tree, and this tree signifies that there are child policies and there are parent policies. So for example, you can see that the policy 6 is inheriting from policy 5, because that line of policy 6 comes out of the folder of policy 5. See that? And similarly, you will see that the policy 4 comes out of the default policy, right? And this is how the inheritance works. So you have a default policy where, let's say, you have 100 settings, and out of that you create a new policy. So it will take all those 100 settings and then you can basically modify them further. And whatever is coming from the parent policy will automatically inherit to the child policy. We'll understand this with a few examples I have over here, right? So here you can see that I have a policy tree where I have policy 1, which looks like the parent over here, right? I make a change to policy 1. So when I say change, I'm talking about a configuration change within the policy. This configuration change could be an alarm or an alert. It could be a threshold. It could be a capacity metric, and so on and so forth. And if I change that in policy 1 in this particular situation, where does it go? So you can see that this basically applies to every child over here because I'm changing it in the root policy, which is kind of a default policy in the system. And it applies to policy 2, policy 3, and because policy 4 is coming out of policy 3, it inherits to that as well, and then it inherits to policy 5 as well. So you can see that how inheritance works in such a simple situation. What if you make a change to policy 2? So this is the second situation. Where does it go? Now, in this case, you can see that policy 2 has no children, and hence that change should be local to policy 2. So you can see how the changes play around. And it's important to understand because if you are working in an environment where you have multiple policies, multiple different business requirements, and you make changes around in the policy system based on day-to-day observations or let's say a monthly policy review, then you might want to be careful around making sure that you do not impact other policies. And that's how you should structure your policy in the first go itself. Right, okay, so the other one, we make a change to policy 3. Where does it go? So you can see that it will only go to policy 3 children, which is policy 4 here. So for policy 3, the change is local, while for policy 4, it is inherited. Okay. All right. So
this essentially, just diving in, if anyone's not familiar with vROps, but they're familiar with Active Directory, it's essentially working in the same way with group policies. If people are familiar with that, then it's working essentially in the same method. So if people aren't quite grabbing it, then thinking of how Active Directory works with group policies, that's another way of understanding how this inherits. But the explanation's superb, mate.
Yep, absolutely. So and mostly everybody has to deal with Active Directory in their life if you're an IT professional. So good point, mate.
Yeah.
All right. So another situation over here, you make a change to policy 1, right? And when the policy 3 already has the Y parameter, some configuration setting changed locally. So remember, this is the same change or same parameter which you're changing in policy 1, which is already being changed to something else in policy 3, right? Where does the change go? Now, this one is a tricky one, right? Here, in this case, the change won't go to policy 3 and policy 4 because I have forced locally something in that configuration or change that locally in the policy 3 itself. And hence, since the local change, it cannot be pushed now from the parent policy, right? And that's what it shows over here. But since I changed something in policy 3, it is automatically inherited to policy 4. So that's important to know as well. And as you run through policies and work through them and go through different configuration options, you will learn how the inheritance piece works. Of course, this is just a quick introduction in terms of you know that there is inheritance behind the policies. And how the policy application works, right? So that's important. So when we go ahead and create a new policy later today, I'll show you how exactly we create one and apply it to objects. So the simple function is this. For instance, let's say you have a virtual machine, right? And you basically want to go ahead and attach it to a policy, right? When I say policy, basically means that any calculation in regards to that virtual machine from a capacity standpoint or alerting standpoint will all be done or defined in a policy. But if that virtual machine is a part of two different policies, then which policy would take precedence or will apply for the system to calculate all these configurations for that virtual machine? So that's what I'm trying to explain over here, right? So the object X, which is, for instance, a virtual machine, is in group 1 and 2, right? So group is where you group a bunch of objects and then apply it to a policy or attach a policy to them, right? So in this case, the object X is a part of two groups, right? And group 1 has policy 1 applied to it, while group 2 has policy 2 applied to it. But if you look at the priority, and the priority is the first screen which I showed you, right? The default 1 and 2, and I think it'll be a good option to jump back and show it to you. So this is the priority, right? And that's what I'm trying to explain over here. So if you have priority 1 applied to policy 1 and priority 2 applied to policy 2, what object or what policy does the object X gets? So remember, the priority piece is just to resolve any conflicts. So if an object ends up into two different policies, then the policy which has a higher priority will be applied to the object. It's as simple as that. So in this case, it'll be policy 1 because it has a higher priority. So if you understand the base, it's good, but at the end of the day, you need to ask a question to yourself that if I have an object which has two policies, then the one which has a better ranking will apply to that particular object. As simple as that, right? Taking to the second example, right? I have an object X which is in group 2 and group 1, right? However, the group 2 is nested in group 1. So this gets interesting. I'm basically nesting two groups together. I have a policy which has a priority 1, which is policy 1, and I have policy 2, which is a priority 2. What policy does object X get now? So nesting doesn't help, and you can see that the priority is for conflict resolution, and that's the hint for you. So higher the priority, that is what the object should get always, right? So in this case also, it will be policy 1 because that has a higher ranking in the system.
So what you're saying, sorry mate,
Simon?
what you're saying is essentially if you've got many policies, an object, or a VM in this case, cannot have multiple policies assigned. It can only ever have one policy dictating what's going on for it.
Absolutely, so that's correct. So that's the gist of the entire system. And that one policy would be decided by the ranking system, which I showed you a couple of minutes back. Yep. All right. Okay, so coming to another situation, right? I have an object which is in group 2, and group 2 is nested in group 1, right? I have priority 1 to policy 1 and priority 2 to policy 2. What policy does object X get? It's tricky. Object X is really not in group 1 if you look at this, right? It's only a part of group 2. So it should only get the policy which is applied to group 2, which is policy 2. So again, explaining this in a way where we are saying that nesting doesn't help. It's a one-to-one relationship, and if you have one policy or one object with multiple policies, then the one with a better ranking wins. As simple as that, right? And we'll show you some of this stuff when we go through the demo piece. Okay, so coming back from conceptual to more of the product feature and how it looks and feels, right? So if you look at vRealize operation 6.0 or 6.0, 6.x, any of the versions, when you first install the system, right, when you go ahead and create vRealize operation appliances in your system, power them up, set them up, configure them, and then go ahead and add your adapter, or which is your vCenter adapter, or add a vCenter to your vCenter adapter itself, configure that piece, you will automatically get this first screen, which basically helps you define your monitoring goals. Now, if I had a chat comment earlier on when we were about to begin that leave the policy to default and that would help. And that was a good comment. However, that might not work for everything because, and we all understand that, right? Because one policy might not apply to our entire ecosystem, which we are running in our data centers, right? So it's important that you have specific policies for specific needs. However, what you get when you install the adapter for the first time is this window which allows you to define or give some basic needs from a monitoring standpoint. Now this is for somebody who will basically use it for the first time to define the default policy in the system. Number one. Number two, it is for somebody who might not be comfortable in the beginning to go ahead and start making changes to the policy. So you can basically get some basic questions, and I'll run through those questions. So when you first install this system and connect it to vCenter, you get default policy, and you get this screen. And in this screen, basically, you have the first option to say whether you want to be alerted on just the infrastructure pieces, which is your ESXi nodes, your vCenter server, your data stores, etc. Or do you want to get alerted just on virtual machines, or do you want to get alerted on everything, which is all vSphere objects? Now, it's important to understand that the amount of alerts you get in the system is defined by this particular setting first, on what objects you get them. The second setting is that what type of alerts you want. You want health, risk, efficiency. So if you're not, if you're new to vRealize operations, then health talks about the current state of any object. Risk talks about mostly the capacity or the risk the object is running into due to capacity issues. And the efficiency talks about the waste which you have in your environment. It might be oversized VMs or snapshots, etc. Right? So do you want alerts for all of those, or do you want them just for health, just for risk, or just for efficiency? So if you're getting a ton of alerts in your system and you think that you don't require a bunch of them, then you might want to go back and change the policy, because earlier when you started, you selected all of them, or you might have selected all of them, and that's why you're getting all those alerts in the system. So that's where you go ahead and optimize your policy further. The next piece, which is do you want to overcommit CPU and memory in your environment, is completely a capacity setting, right? It basically tells you that what kind of overcommitment do you want to do in your system. Do you want to actually overcommit at all? Or do you want to go ahead and overcommit just CPU, just memory, or both? So this basically defines the capacity results at the end of the day, right? If you go ahead and say, I want to overcommit, then the system automatically takes up a few overcommitment ratios. For instance, with the latest version of vRealize operations, it takes 8:1 as the vCPU to core overcommitment ratio, and that's by default, right? So if you say that, yeah, I want to overcommit CPU on this page, we consider that you want to run 8 vCPUs per physical core on your box. Right? This does not consider hyper-threading into the calculation, so just be aware of that. The next thing is around storage and network I/O. So do you want to actually go ahead and measure them or not, or do you want to do your capacity results and the workload results according to storage I/O and network I/O? Now, I get a lot of questions around this. I don't know, Simon, whether you get them or not. But the questions are mostly around why those values which I get in storage and network I/O are always changing, and so the basic answer to that is because the vRealize operation system or the vSphere environment or the ESX environment might not have a clear picture in terms of what kind of storage I/O or network I/O you have in your entire fabric.
But what I've come across is in some cases where it's not quite accurate or odd, the hardware it's running on might not be supported as well. That's usually an extreme case, but in some cases, for whatever reason, ESXi or whatever isn't picking up the storage properly, and then you're going to get erratic results there.
Yep. So ideally, what happens in the background is that it's all based on the peak experienced value. So if I'm doing a network throughput of 8 gigabits per second for the first time I start monitoring the system, then 8 gigabits per second becomes my threshold by default in the system. That's how it calculates it, because to be honest, it doesn't know that on upstream out of your chassis to your switches what kind of bandwidth you have. It doesn't know that, because no hypervisor will know about that, because you might have different systems in the back end. So that's why these values are calculated on the basis of observed values rather than what you have available in your environment. So that's important to note. So before you turn on these settings or try to switch off on or off these settings, you need to ensure that what kind of calculations you're getting out of them and how valid they are for your environment. Okay, so that was 6.0, but if you look at 6.1 and beyond, which includes 6.2 as well, there are a few changes in this defined monitoring goal screen. The first change is that you basically, again, for the alert perspective, you get the same option when you want to alert on virtual machines or infrastructure or both. That doesn't change. It does ask you around what kind of alerts you want, and you can choose health, risk, and efficiency. It's the same setting, but if you move forward, it does not. It splits out the CPU and memory overcommitment page, right? And the memory capacity is now has a new option, which is called memory consumed, right? So far, if you looked at till 6.0, you had the option of going ahead and calculating memory capacity numbers using the demand value, which is quite aggressive. And with 6.1, and people might not know that you now have a memory consumed value, which is similar to, or which is exactly as same as what you see in the vSphere client as memory consumed. And you can do all your capacity-based calculations and even your workload calculations based on memory consumed. And I'll show you those settings as we move forward today. The other option that you get is to enable vSphere hardening guide alerts right on the policy screen itself. So that's something that you can do right on the screen, and as soon as you do this, it will basically give you an option in the policy to set up hardening features for your ESXi nodes only, and basically you can alert yourself on them, or you can go ahead and create dashboards around them, etc. So that's a new setting which comes in on the screen itself for you to configure. In the previous releases, go ahead, Simon.
I was just going to say a word of caution with that one. If you do switch it on, you will get, if you haven't already hardened your hosts or whatever, you will get a lot of alerts. I was experimenting it in my home lab, and when you switch it on, it will complain bitterly at you because nothing you have, or a lot of it, isn't compliant. And if you're not really a fan of having to wade through all of that, then don't switch it on. Perhaps switch it on at a later date and apply it to certain areas.
Absolutely, agreed to that. So whatever options you get on this first screen play a major role, because at the end of the day, they create your default policy, which is like a catch-all policy, right? All the objects, virtual machines, hosts, they're all tagged to this policy by default. And then you start creating newer policies out of them and attaching them to groups of your choice. Okay, let me just move forward and show you how memory consume aligns with the vSphere memory usage. So on this screen, you can see that on the left, you have the vSphere client snapshot, right? And that snapshot shows you the memory usage value. Now, the same usage value actually translates into memory consumed. So if you go to a ESX server or a cluster and in vROps and then select the option to look at the capacity piece from the analysis tab, you can see that in this screenshot, the workload is now not only driven by demand, but can also be driven by consumed. And in this case, it's driven by consumed, so you can see that screenshot right below, highlighted in red. So, and this value actually matches the value in the vCenter server. So, one note of caution over here as well, that this is a very conservative setting. So you might want to make sure that you are, because basically the memory consumed is calculating or putting in everything on the table, right from the demand, what the workload is using, plus any kind of reservations, plus overheads, plus shared pages, etc., etc. So it's a high number, and that's our habit as well, right? When you go to vCenter and log in and click on a host, go to the summary page, and you will see that the memory, all the hosts have a high amount of memory consumed or memory usage. But if you come to vROps, you will see that, oh, the active demand is pretty less. But if you switch over to this setting, while you're making sure that you are neck to neck with the vCenter, you're actually making yourself very conservative, and hence your thresholds on alerts, etc., might have to move up as well. Otherwise, you'll start getting a bunch of alerts, and the capacity numbers will also be very conservative. So that's what you will need to be worried about if you choose this setting. Okay, so you can see that so basically you can visualize at the host object or a vCenter or a data center or cluster. It applies to all the 4 different objects and does capacity calculations on all of them. So while the screenshot shows you just the work, if you switch over to the capacity remaining badge over here, or we'll do that in our live environment, then you will be able to see that you have more options around memory consumed and how it does the calculation for you. Okay, I have a screenshot for that. So you can see that I go to capacity remaining this time on the top, and now I'm getting capacity remaining results, not only or on the basis of memory consumed straight away. And they will be conservative. So, but yeah, if I would suggest that if you have a policy which you are creating for a bunch of business critical applications, or a cluster which is running business critical applications, which cannot overcommit memory or cannot overcommit CPU, and you want to make sure that you are never putting memory pressure on those virtual machines and the ESX servers underlying, then you can basically use memory consumed there, because you are considering every single bit of memory which the ESX servers of the virtual machines uses as being already active and utilized, and hence you do not want to give it to anybody else from a capacity standpoint. So that's what you can use it for. That's one of the examples actually. We'll run through some more as we move forward. Okay, so again, reiterating, this is the setting. When you do the initial wizard creation, this is where you can change it. If you are upgrading from 6.0 to 6.1, then you, of course, do not have the opportunity to run through that wizard once again. And there was a question on the screen, on the chat, can I run this wizard once again? There is a hack which I did in my lab, and I was able to run it once again, but I would not recommend, because that involves deleting the adapter and recreating it. And if you want to do it, you do it on your own risk. Sunny never told you to do that. So yeah, you can basically kill the adapter and recreate it. Once you recreate it in the same environment, it opens up this window again, and you can do the policy configuration. Do test it in your labs 100 times before you plan to take it anywhere close to production. However, the better option would not be to delete the adapter, but to come here and go ahead and change the configuration, which I'm teaching you today. So that should help going forward. But yeah, if you really want to go ahead and use the memory consumed option and don't want to go through the pain of configuring it everywhere in the system, then you do have an option to go to this link from where you can download 6.1 policy, which has memory consumed available by default, and import that into your system and make it a default policy. So that way, memory consumed will become a default setting in your system. So that's basically a workaround for you to go ahead and do it automatically. I would still recommend that you go ahead and do it manually so that you not only learn about it, but also make sure that if you have to change it tomorrow, then you can come back and change it within the policy. Okay, so that's basically showing you that I've imported the policy, and now once I've imported it, it shows in the list of the active policies right over here, right? And as soon as you import it, and this holds true for any policy, if you're, let's say if you're running two environments, one environment in Beijing and the other environment in Hong Kong, and the Beijing environment and the Hong Kong environment are exactly the same, and you're basically running just two different locations, and you want to apply, you created a new policy in Beijing and your vROps instance, and you've done a bunch of settings according to your business requirements. You just basically want to go ahead and apply the same settings in the Hong Kong site. You can export the policy from Beijing by using the export policy option and import it in Hong Kong vROps instance, and you're done. And that's how I manage a lot of large customers as well, where I make all the changes in a development environment. Once I'm done and I'm happy with the changes, I go ahead and import them in their production environment. So that way it becomes easier for us to do policy management. Okay, so that's what the setting looks like, or that's how it looks like when you actually open the policy itself. So when you're editing the policy, there's the memory consumed setting under the workload. So I will run through that piece during the demo. Again, memory consumed for capacity. So the previous screen was for workload. This is for capacity remaining and time remaining. This is where you can set up the memory consumed value and put a buffer around it if you have to, and do any kind of overcommitments if you want to. I'm sorry for that. You can't do overcommitments there. You can only do overcommitments with memory allocation, which we'll talk about when we do the live demo as well. Okay, so again, you can influence the stress patch with the memory consumed as well if you wish to, and stress basically defines what kind of virtual machines are, or what are the virtual machines which are basically stressed out because of high workload, and it also suggests any kind of capacity enhancements in terms of adding CPU or RAM to ensure that you have a healthy virtual machine and it's serving the workload of the application which is running on top of it. Okay, I think I've come to the point of policies put to practice, which is demo time. Let me just go ahead and give you a few use cases over here at this point of time, right? So we understand policies a little bit, but we sometimes struggle to go ahead and understand their impact. So we'll just go ahead and try to configure a new policy and do a policy creation and see how it works in real life. We'll also leverage or discuss about leveraging the out-of-the-box policies. That's something interesting. That's something which VMware gives you within the product, and you can leverage them if you have to, or if you want a good starting point. And then we will also talk about some changes to the policies and their impact. So we'll run through the policy screen and each and every option essentially to see how we can give you a dope of how policies work. Okay, so with that, I would probably give it over to Simon for checking if there are any questions before I do this switch over to my
yeah, we've got
station.
We've got
Go ahead.
Yeah, we've got just the one question for you, Sonny. Daniel was asking, is there anything that we need to be aware of in terms of policies if we're upgrading from 6.1 to 6.2?
Okay, good question. So there is nothing which changes from a policy standpoint, so you don't have to worry about any specific changes. What I always recommend is that you keep a backup copy of your policy. So as soon as you update it, you basically go ahead and keep a backup of it. And of course, if you're upgrading from 6.1 to 6.2, the bigger thing which you need to take care of is that you get 6.2a, which is the latest patch. Right, Simon?
Yeah, 6.2a, I don't know how many of you are aware of it. It seemed to come out fairly quiet. But yeah, definitely go looking for it, guys, at the end of the session. So if you've gone to 6.2, definitely you'll want 6.2a. There's a couple of key fixes there.
Yep, absolutely. So from a policy standpoint, nothing to worry about. So I would probably give or call out Ivan at this moment. So Ivan Rahbak, he's a friend and a colleague. He's probably one of the good guy or great guy in vROps in the region and around the world. And I think he's on the call, might be driving his kids to school. But he basically is a CTO ambassador alongside me. We both are ambassadors to the VMware Office of the CTO, and we both drive participation of customers with our R&D folks, and taking feedback from customers, feeding it into the R&D systems so that we can improve our products. At the same time, we basically bring the message from R&D to customers and the folks in the field. When I say folks in the field, it's our VMware colleagues, just like Simon and others, to make sure that we are listening to whatever they're experiencing from a customer standpoint and take it back to the office of the CTO and our R&D folks to ensure that we have better products, improved products. And this program is started around 4 years ago, and it's growing like crazy. And we have a bunch of people within our team, and we basically grouped ourselves, divided ourselves, and we're trying to divide and conquer as much as our customer space and products as possible. So if you have anything to do with VMware products, or if you have any questions, any improvements that you're looking at, there are various sources and channels, and we are one of them as well. So you feel free to reach out, drop us a note on our contacts, and we'd be happy to either help you straight away or guide you to the right person from a product standpoint. All right, and why Ivan came to my mind is because he runs this lab in Singapore, and he basically manages everything apart from doing his role of a staff senior system engineer, which is going ahead and selling a bunch of our solutions technically, and at the same time doing CTO ambassador stuff, writing books, etc. So I don't know how he does it, but yeah, he does a bunch of stuff. Even if you're there, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and talk about it as well if you want to. He brags about himself a lot. All right, so coming to our lab, if you look at the policies piece, right, that applies to your vRealize operations and across and all the infrastructure which you're monitoring, right? So if you look at this lab over here, and if I go ahead and show you what all I have in my inventory tree, there's a bunch of stuff because we have all our management packs, and which are monitoring third-party as well as other VMware solutions. But just to give you a quick look around what I have in my vSphere environment, where most of you spend most of your time, is that I have 3 different vCenters and 3 different data centers, and within those data centers I have different clusters which are available, right? And that's what I'm monitoring essentially. And if you look at this, if I select the vSphere deep world over here, it's being monitored by the vSphere solutions default policy. So this is where you see that what is the policy which is applied to your system or to an object which you have highlighted or selected in the inventory pane, right? So let's just go ahead and straight away jump into where policies are in the system. So when you log in the first time and you come to the home screen, you basically have to go ahead and click on the administration button, which is right here. And under administration, you need to go ahead and click on policies. And once you click there, you get the exact two screens or two tabs which I showed you during the slide deck or during my presentation. So here you see the list of active policies, which means these are the ones which are applied to one or more objects or groups, right? And you can see that I have a default policy with a ranking of D over here, and it is not assigned to any group. However, it's affecting all my objects which are there because it's the default policy. It's not associated to a specific group, but it gets everything, whatever you have in your system which you're monitoring through vRealize Operations Manager. Remember,
Hey, funny brother.
out of Ivan, here you go.
Hey, finally managed to unmute myself, man. Sorry, it was too technical for me. Yeah, go ahead. Just telling you I'm here.
All right, bro. Thanks for skipping it. All right. So if you look at this, I have two additional policies apart from the default policy, and they are assigned to their specific groups. I have a tier 1 policy and I have a tier 2 policy which have their specific groups, and within those groups I have different objects which are applied to that particular group and which are a part of that particular group and applying that particular policy to them, right? So that's how you will see the list of, or how you can have multiple different policies in your system, right? If you see here, the tier 1 and tier 2 over here means that I have two different set of environments or two different categories in my infrastructure which provide different kind of services. So a tier 1 might be a system where I'm giving you the latest and the fastest blade servers along with the solid-state drives on my storage with 10 gigs or InfiniBand, etc. from a network perspective, and everything is up fast to you, right? And everything is basically high-end. And that's my tier 1. And if that is my tier 1 environment, and then I can have a specific policy to that tier 1 environment as well from a performance standpoint, because I know that on a solid-state drive array, I would not get a latency of 20 milliseconds, or I should not get it at least. And if that's the case, then my thresholds might be less than that for alerting, and hence I will have a different policy altogether for that. The second case is a tier 2 where it's a different kind of an environment. You can take the same concept of tier 1 and tier 2 to your virtual machines, where you can say that these virtual machines are critical to me, important to me, and hence they will be a part of tier 1 policy, and there will be no overcommitment on these virtual machines, while there is a second set where I want to do overcommitment, and that will be into my tier 2 environment. And then I have a test and dev environment where I want to just go ahead and overcommit 200% because I don't care about the performance. Then there is where I will go ahead and have a tier 3 policy, for instance. So that's how different active policies list in the screen. But if you go to policy library, there is where you play around and create new policies, edit existing ones, or understand the inheritance of the relationship between the policies. So you can see that by default, the DE or default policy is here, out of which I have two policies, which are the child policies, tier 1 and tier 2. So if I change anything in the default policy, it will automatically flow around to tier 1 and tier 2. And for instance, if I have a tier 3 coming out of tier 2, in that situation, if I change anything in tier 2, that will only be changed in tier 3 and not go above, right? It doesn't go north, it just comes southbound. All right, so that's how this stuff works. Let me just go ahead and now create a new policy and see how I can run you through some of those steps, right? And I have a scenario here where I have custom groups through which I'm applying policies. So if you look at my environment, I have a bunch of groups created, right? And I have 3 groups here where I have a tier 1 group to which I have already applied a tier 1 policy. It has all my important VMs. Don't look at the health, it's a lab. I have a tier 2 group where I have my second priority VMs, and I have a third, which is a bronze group. So if you noticed earlier in my policy window, I did have policies for tier 1 and tier 2 workload, but I did not have a policy for tier 3 workload, right? So everything which I want to monitor in tier 3 is actually being monitored by the default policy right now, right? Or if some of those workloads are a part of tier 1 or tier 2, then they will get the higher priority policy applied to them. But if I want to go ahead and create a specific policy for my tier 3 group, I can do that. I can just go ahead and say add a new policy. And this is important, so I'll just go ahead and run through these steps. But if you have any questions, it might be the time to go ahead and put them on the chat window, and I'll be happy to take them. So here you go, and let's say we call it the tier 3 policy. Give it a nice description. This will help monitor tier 3 workloads group. Now, this is an important thing to note. Start with, right? To start with basically helps you to define that what would be the policy out of which this new policy would be inheriting. Okay? So that's as simple as that. And by default, everything inherits from the default policy itself, right? Which is what you defined when you first ran through that configuring wizard, which I was showing you before, right? Now you don't have to really need somebody to go ahead and explain you all this, but if you basically want to learn about this and you want to go ahead and learn more about this, the options, then what VMware has done is they put this wizard right over here, the getting started, where they explain what is the policy. But sometimes it is easier if you want to pull up this video right here. Right, so you can just click on this video and you will get, I believe, one of our staff engineers going ahead and explaining you what I'm explaining you right now. So this is a very handy feature in vRealize Operations Manager, and you can see the video feature in various different places. So that's important to note. But yeah, coming back to the tier 3 policy, I can choose the default policy, or I can use the VMware given out-of-the-box policies. Right. Now, there are various out-of-the-box policies. The first one is the base setting. Now, the base setting is basically something which is factory default, right? Something which comes from VMware as factory default. And that factory default cannot be changed. So that is always my first policy. And from there, I can create my default policy and other policies. The other out-of-the-box policies which VMware gives is basically listed right over here, right? Some say that you do not want to overcommit memory. Some say that you do not want to overcommit CPU. Some say you want to overcommit both. Some talk about not having risk alerts, etc. So it's basically, if you think about it, it's different policies with different configurations for different kind of setups and environments. While I like the idea, for somebody who's starting new with policies, what I would recommend is that you should always start with your default policy, and then you should go ahead and edit the default policy, or not the default policy, but you should go ahead and edit the settings in your new policy of what you want in terms of newer thresholds, newer capacity, overcommitment ratios, etc. So that's how I usually start. Simon, do you have a best practice which you follow on policies?
No, pretty much the same, really. And as you said, just to underline, avoid modifying the default policy. If you're gonna do any tinkering with the policies or experiment with them, just create a new one and inherit it from the default policy. If you start to modify the out-of-the-box policies, things are not going to end well for you. So yeah, pro tip really.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so once I'm done starting with the policy, giving it a name, description, and then telling where to start with, I can then go ahead and select the base policy and the policy for various different objects. Now this is important to understand, right? So while you can do policies for the vSphere environment, as soon as you start installing third-party adapters, you can go ahead and do configuration settings from a capacity or alerting or a performance standpoint for third-party adapters as well. It could be VMware solutions or it could be non-VMware solutions, right? So that's what you can do from this specific screen, right? And here you can see that I can go ahead and select what adapter I want to configure or what settings I want to configure on a specific adapter, including NSX solutions or internal VMware solutions, or if you have a third-party solution. So, for instance, if you're using a HP Storefront Analytics for monitoring your HP storage, or a EMC Storage Analytics pack for monitoring your EMC storage, etc. All that can be incorporated in the policy from here, or all those objects could be or settings could be done from this particular page. I am just doing settings for my vSphere environment, so I will move forward and go into the analysis setting. And here, again, I not only get to choose what configurations I want to make for third-party adapters, but also the vCenter adapter, right? So let's say I want to go ahead and do everything for the vCenter adapter. So let's say I want to go ahead and configure the changes in the vCenter adapter itself for monitoring my vCenter objects. Then I do have the option now with 6.0 and beyond to go ahead and do it on various different objects within the vCenter. Very important to note. Earlier in 5.x vCOps, we just had the option to go ahead and configure the policy for infrastructure and virtual machines. That's it. But now you have the option to do it on your clusters, on custom data centers, which is an option with 6.1 and beyond, with data center, data store, host system, and so on and so forth, right? So I'll pick up one. Let's say I pick up clusters, and I'll show you some of those settings in the cluster. So I select cluster and click on add, and as soon as I do that, on the right-hand side, I would see the settings which I can make, or configuration changes which I can make to the policy. And this, when I apply it to a particular cluster, then all the capacity, performance calculations will happen according to these settings which I'm defining on the right-hand side, right? So you do have an option to pull more than one object on this page. So you can do cluster, and if you want, let's say you can do virtual machine, and click on add, and basically you will see that added in the list below, and you will see virtual machine over here. You can expand it further and make changes to the virtual machine policies or settings as well if you want to. For this demonstration, I will stick to cluster and see how much I can run through each of these settings. Right. The first one is workload. So I just go ahead and click on the drop-down next to workload. Now remember that if you want to make changes here, you need to unlock this button by pressing this button right on the right-hand side. I hope you can see it on the WebEx. And if you make some changes and you want to apply those changes, make sure that you unlock or lock up this button again once you've done your changes. Because I've seen certain cases where people make changes, did not lock the button back, and changes never happened. So here is where you can actually define that your workload batch score is driven by what all counters. Now here you can see that I'm saying that my CPU workload is driven by memory demand, and my CPU demand, and my memory workload batch is calculated through memory demand. Here is where you can switch from memory demand to memory consumed if you wish to. That's one of the settings, especially from a cluster standpoint, right? If you want to do it at the host level or the vCenter level or the virtual machine level, then you need to pull those objects from the left-hand side and then make those changes to those particular objects. Very important. You don't change a setting in a cluster and expect it to flow down to other objects because they're all segregated now, right? So that's how you make changes over here. I will leave it back to, let's say, CPU demand and memory demand for now. And if I want, I have other options as well. If I want to go ahead and put network, data store, as well as disk space demand into consideration, I can put that, and that all will be used for going ahead and configuring workload. How the workload batch color changes is all dependent upon the scores over here. So while you now don't see the scores on the main page, but you still have scores within the system for various objects, and you can basically go ahead and change that right over here. Once you're done with the changes, just go ahead and lock the screen so that you know that they will be applied. Same goes with anomalies. You can basically change the colors if you want to, and lock and unlock it and see what is the right color for you to see anomalies in your system. And with faults as well. So there's nothing new with faults. You just have to make sure that you go ahead and change the thresholds if you wish to. The important part is capacity and time remaining. And there were a bunch of requests that if I can run through some of this data when I do the webinar. So I will probably spend the next 10 minutes over here. So capacity and time remaining is the capacity policy. So everything that you saw from workload anomalies and fault perspective is something which is related to issues happening in your infrastructure, right? It's more of what is happening right now. But if you talk about risk in terms of capacity risk and capacity itself, then everything which happens from the VM remaining, the time remaining, and all those fancy numbers which you get out of the system, you get it because of this policy right over here, right? And you can see that by default, you can there are different thresholds set for the batch colors, which you can change for capacity remaining, and you can do the same for time remaining as well. And then comes the exciting part of how the calculations happen at the end of the day. So here you can see that I have various different resources, and then I'm doing buffering on those resources, and then I can say whether I want to overcommit some of those resources or not. And all that can happen over here, right? So here, for instance, if you go back to your systems and your default policy, it will automatically have a 10% buffer because I've just chosen this from my default policy. You may or may not want that 10%, or you might want to increase it to 20%. What it basically means is that if I have, let's say, 10 systems or 10 ESX servers in that cluster, then I will take out the capacity of one ESX server or buffer because I'm saving, or I'm doing 10% buffer over here, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is that I can go ahead and reduce this buffer to 0 as well if I want to. So that's my buffering piece. The second thing is that if I go with CPU allocation-based capacity planning policy, where I want to say that I want to, no matter what my performance is, I want to allocate X number of vCPUs to a core, then I can select CPU allocation here. If I want to buffer out, I can buffer out any number over here by just double-clicking the setting and changing it to, let's say, 5%, and I can then go ahead and change the ratio where I can say that, yes, I want to allocate, for instance, 5 vCPUs per core, right? Now, there might be a question that what is the right number of allocation, or what is the right ratio for me? I'll not be able to answer that today in this call or this session because it might take more than half a day to discuss the allocation ratios. But yeah, if you know your allocation ratios, then this is the place where you go ahead and set them, and you save them. It just basically changes all your capacity calculations accordingly, right? If you don't want to go with allocation but just stick to demand, you uncheck this button and just stick to demand based itself along with any kind of buffers. You can do CPU allocation as well as memory allocation and disk space allocation. And in all those three cases, which is this, and this, you get the option to do any kind of overcommitment if you have to, right? So that's how the allocation policy works. The demand policy is based on active demand in terms of whatever the workload is requesting from the hypervisor to use or to run that application. And now you have the memory consumed. So if you don't want to go ahead with a conservative option of memory demand, because that usually goes ahead and tells you that all your virtual machines are oversized and they're not using the memory, etc. But you really know that you can't reclaim that memory because you know that your applications might be configured to use that memory whenever required, and you can't really push out the carpet or pull out the carpet below your applications, and you want the system to consider memory consumed for them, and that's where you can go ahead and set or do the setting over here, right, from a cluster perspective or from a VM perspective as well. So, or from a host perspective as well. So that's where you go ahead and do the memory consume setting. So once you do that, and once you know what your buffers are, etc., and you configured them, you can move down further and see if you want to go ahead and choose these options. So these options are used for additional time and additional effects on time and capacity remaining, basically, things such as high availability. So if you say, I want to go ahead and block some resources for HA, then it goes ahead and picks up your HA settings and understands that you basically want to go ahead and, let's say, take out one node from the cluster for your HA setting. So it will subtract the total capacity, or if you subtract the one node capacity from the total capacity you have available. So there are two things which it subtracts, right? One is the buffer, and then it subtracts the HA capacity as well, right? So out of the remaining capacity after subtracting the buffer. So that's how it works. And then you can select the option of using stress to account for spikes and peaks. So if you have an environment which you're monitoring and you think that this environment is critical to you, and even if the environment spikes out or there are spikes in the environment, I want to capture them and consider them for my capacity calculation, then you want to go ahead and you really want to go ahead and check that option. For an environment where you know it's a test and dev, people run I/O meters all the time and can go crazy, you can basically go ahead and uncheck that option. Then you have the option of committed projects. So projects is another feature in vRealize operations, which we might want to cover in some of our sessions during this year. And it just basically says that if you do projects or commit any projects in the system, then do you want the capacity to be the capacity remaining scores to be calculated along with those projects into consideration, taking those projects into consideration. So that's what this does, right? And then you have a current and a trend in terms of whether you want to go ahead and always look at the exact capacity which you have right now, or do you want the system to trend out and say that you will have capacity increase as you move into the future, because that's how usually trending works. It mostly says that, oh, you added 10 systems today in a cluster, then you added 20 systems, so I'm hoping that you will add 10 systems more next month because that has been your trend so far. So I would recommend you keep that to current instead of trend, because you might not keep adding nodes to a cluster, for instance. Provisioning time buffer, very important, basically is the headroom which you want to go ahead and give to yourself before the system tells you that you run out of capacity. So if the system tells you that you run out of capacity today, and then you really run out of capacity, you have 0 virtual machines to provision. But if you tell the system that I want a 30 days heads up, so that heads up or headroom, you basically go ahead and put that as a provisioning time buffer. Considering that it'll take you 30 days to bring in new capacity, like a new host or a new storage, etc. Most of the customers I work with want to go ahead and increase that to 60 days, and some of them, if they are in a remote country, then they even go to 90 days as well, so that they can basically make sure that they have enough buffer or enough headroom before they run out of capacity. So if you set this, let's say you set it to 30 days, right? And after 30 days you're running out of capacity, then on the first day itself, let's say on 1st of Jan, you are on 1st of Jan today, and on 30th of Jan you're running out of capacity, then the system will give you a message on 1st of Jan itself that you have 0 days remaining. So that's how the calculation works. So that's about capacity and time remaining. There are more options around stress. So I would probably, I'm just looking at the time, and I think that we have a bunch of things. I'm thinking if you want to do a capacity policy 2.0 session as well, Simon, because there are a bunch of things which we can go over, and I'm sure there are questions around today as well. So what do you think? Do we stop here, take those questions, and then do a 2.0 session next time and continue on from here? Or, because I can see this can go for another hour.
Sure. I've not seen any other questions at the moment, so I don't know if anybody's been holding back, whether they have any questions or whether we should continue. I think definitely we would need to cover more on the capacity planning and projects and those bits and pieces and how you can factor them in. But that'll be definitely for another session. Does anybody have any questions at the moment? I'm guessing at the moment by the Q&A that's a no.
Okay.
Okay, I think you're good to carry on, mate.
Okay, fantastic. So I'll probably spend another 5 minutes here and try to wrap up the use case which we were talking about, right? And then see how we want to go ahead and do more deep dive into the policy as we move forward into the next session, right? So once you go ahead and configure the policy over here, or once you go ahead and configure all your settings over here from a capacity standpoint, workload standpoint, and also from a standpoint of stress in terms of how you will calculate your virtual machines are being stressed or not, and other settings which are there in the policy, which I'm not going through right now because I think it will be really useful if we do a full session again or continue the session next time to go ahead and add more pieces to this, right, and explain this further. So once you've done the analysis setting in terms of made configuration changes to your policy, right, you basically jump on to the workload automation piece. So here is where you can use the new feature of workload automation, which allows you to go ahead and migrate workloads across clusters. So it's very important to understand this because this workload automation feature around 6.2 and 6.1 and 6.2 is made to go ahead and work along with DRS, which basically moves workloads within the cluster, and workload automation, which gives you recommendations to balance out workloads across clusters so that they are basically balanced out and each of your clusters is happy from a capacity and a performance standpoint. Another big topic which we can have a separate session on. Then here is where you define that what all metrics you will collect from your policy. So that's what you define in this policy on these hosts, which are in the part of this cluster. I want only these 100 metrics to be collected and not the other ones. So that's where you can define the metric piece. The next step is important, alert, symptoms, and definitions. So alert, symptoms, and definitions can be defined over here where you say that what kind of alerts I need and what kind of symptoms are driving those alerts and what would be various different thresholds which I can configure for those symptoms. Then I do get an option to go ahead and attach any custom profiles. These are custom capacity profiles which are available within vRealize operations policies and the capacity settings. So that's where I go ahead and pick up the custom profiles from, and then I go ahead and come to the final step of what all I have configured in my policy applied to a specific group. So if you see here, I have a tier 3 bronze group which I created and I showed you earlier on, I just go ahead and apply that policy to this particular group and click on Save. And as soon as I do that, it basically goes ahead and churns out a new policy for me, which, remember, was a child of my default policy. And you can see that this will be now an active policy because I have applied it to a group which has two objects, right? And it has a priority of 3 now in the list. If I want and I really need, then I can just do a select any policy and then do a drag and drop and make my tier 3 policy, for instance, as my priority 2 policy or my priority 1 policy. So that's how the drag and drop works, and you can change the priority of your policies if you have a conflict. Remember, if you have an object and 2 policies and you want a specific policy to apply to that particular object, then it should have a better ranking in the system, and that's where you change the rankings. And that's where we should conclude today, because we finished, I think, session number 1 of creating a policy per se. So let me just go back and jump to my deck and see how we want to use it further. Just go ahead and minimize this. Okay, so what we did was we basically go ahead and looked at some of the settings within a policy. Of course, we are nowhere near to completion from going through each and every setting, so we'll try to involve that and include that. We looked at creating a new policy, attaching it to a specific group, and we also discussed about leveraging some of the out-of-the-box policies if we have to, right? So if you want more in terms of understanding how these policies work and various different configurations, you can't wait for the next session, then you basically can go ahead and walk through some of these videos. Some of these settings I have learned from these videos itself, which are available in the feature walkthrough website of VMware. So once you have this recording, or if you want to screenshot your page, you can, and you can get these options or these particular videos and use them. I do want to go ahead and point out to some blogs which might be really helpful for you from a policy standpoint, and also vRealize operations in generic. So Simon and Ivan, of course, are one of my favorites. And there's Jason, Peter, and Sunny. Oh, that's myself. So you can use some of those blog links if you want to. I do want to also talk about a new book which is coming out on performance and capacity management. This is written by Ivan. This is the 2nd edition. And I'm one of the reviewers, and I've gone through it, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. It's based on a lot of stuff which we have worked over the past year, me and Ivan. And I think, I'm not sure, Ivan, if you want to jump in and tell us if the book is available to order right now. I think it's in a pre-order state at this moment. But if you want, you should be able to.
My suggestion would be, thanks, Sunny. My suggestion would be to wait because the discount code has not been produced yet, and of course it will be available in your blog. There are 2 reviewers, right? Sunny and Mark, and I think they will have the discount code when it gets closer. I think in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Thanks, Sunny.
Awesome. So yeah, I'll be working out to see if we can get a discount code which I can post on my blog posts, and so you can just wait for the book, and once you have the discount code, you probably get a discount on it and get it on a cheaper price. But yeah, any money for that book should be good if Ivan gives me the cut. All right. With that, I think you should end it or call it a day for this session with a promise that we will come back and do a deeper session on policies in terms of going through the configurations of each and every policy and how they work. Any questions, Simon, at this moment?
No, it's all quiet at the moment. I don't know if anybody's been holding back. Another thing I'll say while we're waiting for anyone to type in any questions is if anybody's got any particular area of vROps that they're particularly interested in knowing more about, then we'd be all ears. So you can send either of us an email or reach out to us on Twitter. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and plan the sessions from what we've seen from the customers that we've spoken to and the individuals that we've spoken to. So yeah, if there's a particular thing that's burning that you really want to learn or know more about or discuss, then just let us know. We're quite approachable.
Absolutely. At this time, I would also want to say that in a couple of days' time, we will have this session, it's already recording. We'll have this cleaned up and posted on our blogs, and be our guest to go ahead and view it. And if you have any questions, use the comments section of the blog and post your comments. We will be coming back on 3rd Friday of the next month with a new session. And again, the details will be out on our blog, so keep an eye. You might want to go ahead and screenshot the blog links if you want to. And just keep an eye on it, and we'll be back. And thank you once again. Thank you, Simon.
Yep, thank you.